Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Neon Salon. I'm joined today by Tom Keller, author of the Vegas Fae Series. Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll just hop right into it with our sort of standard intro kind of questions. So how did you get started with writing?
Well, I mean, I guess I was always a reader, right? So even in elementary school, I read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and those kind of things. And I could actually thank a couple of professors at UNLV way back when in the 70s, Dr. John Ersfield and Ed Gooden. They had writing classes. One was creative writing and one was don't make mistakes, even though I make a lot of mistakes. So I wrote some stuff in college and then I kind of like forgot about it, right? Or didn't forget. Life gets in the way and then you have to put things aside. So you do write a lot, believe it or not, as a police officer. I wrote a lot of reports and a lot of comprehensive reports about problems or different issues. The story of Return of a High Fae is kind of a funny thing, but I was working for the federal government and I wanted to write a crime mystery. But I had some attorneys that kind of said, well, you got to be really careful because if you write about our clients, we could get sued, right? So I didn't write the crime mystery and somehow wrote a fantasy about a guy that, finds out magic is real.
So you started off kind of as a writer in college, then it sounds like, and then moved into it.
I always wanted to write something, but I have a pile of rejection slips from back in the old days, back when they still had periodicals and stuff like that. I can really thank a blog. It was Joe Conrad's Newbie's Guide to Writing. And that's how I learned about Amazon. And that's how I first self-published. It was a lot different in 2012, believe me, than it is now.
And we're going to talk about that also later. I've got a bunch of questions about that. But before we get to that, let's turn briefly to the city of Las Vegas. So how did you get here?
My dad was a pilot. He got stationed here, and my mom and him, we lived apart for a while, moved here. Parents got divorced, and I stayed here with my mom and dad. My dad lived here, my mom lived here. So I grew up here in the 60s and 70s. Went to work in the casinos when I was 15 and a half as a busboy, and then joined Metro when I was 21. So I kind of been in the city forever. It was an awesome place to grow up, let me tell you. There was maybe 250,000 people here then. Right. And the next 10 years, you got up to 450. So it was just a totally different town than it is now. And of course, the corporations didn't run the city, the mob did. The casinos, there's a whole different atmosphere.
One of the questions I always ask is if you can tell a story from one of the stories you remember from when you first moved here, if you can.
Yeah, it wouldn't be when I first moved here, but when I, because I was a kid, Vegas was a fun town and it was an okay place to grow up. When I obviously, didn't exactly come from rich parents. So when I was 15 and a half, started working in the hotels. So I started as a busboy, wound up working as a cook in a major casino hotel, and worked for several people that ran the hotel. And there were times when I would go out to places, like they had houses that they owned and we would serve food and there were recognizable people there. And I never really put two and two together. And then when I became a cop at Metro, I was getting a briefing on organized crime, and you remember Tony Splatcher is, right?
Yes.
Tony Splatcher was a mob enforcer, if you saw the movie Casino. So here I am in this briefing, and they put up a flow chart and, and a picture graph, and here's half the people I used to work for. The head chef of the hotel, the sous chef, and they were all Tony Splatcher's people. And I learned later that, a lot of money was going through the supply area, going out the back door. And it kind of made sense because we would be sent to they owned a house on the Sahara golf course, and we would be serving food. And there were, movie stars, and there were comedians, and then there were some people that you recognize from the news.
That might be the best coming to Vegas story I've heard so far.
It was just it was a totally different town in those days because my mom worked in the hotels, right? So when we wanted to go to a show, my mom just talked to her boss, who called someone at another casino, and boom, you got comped, right? And you were going to a show.
Let's talk about the Vegas Fae Series. So for anyone who hasn't read it, can you give a little brief description of what it's about?
It was really kind of geared to an older audience because the main character, Robert, he's a 50-year-old ex-cop PI, and he's goes to take care of serving a subpoena. And the next thing you know, he's involved in all this crazy stuff with magic. Doesn't believe it at first and thinks everyone's crazy. And but as the story progresses, his dog Charlie starts talking to him, and he finds out that he's really heavily involved in this world that his parents didn't want him involved in. But boom, now the bubble's broken. So he's involved in magic. So the basic theme is you have, two worlds, right? You have the regular world and then you have the world of magic. And they go out of their way to make sure that the regular world doesn't know about it. Mm-hmm. And Vegas becomes a great place for the Fae to be because you have all the wishes and dreams of people that, trying to win money, right? Gambling. So there's a lot of magic that gets produced in the air by the wishes and dreams of these people. So that's what first kind of draws the Fae here back in the old days. And then, although I get accused of mixing mythology a lot, like prove that mine is wrong and yours is right? But I like to mix different mythologies in. There are certain books that have, go back to Babylon and Sumerian mythology, and then I kind of mix stuff in here and there just to make it fun.
I've read the first book. I plan to get to the rest. But I love.
But that's okay.
What's that?
It's probably my worst book, but that's okay.
I know
just
you said
as
that.
a writer, but no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I think we all look back at our first book and we look at like,
man, I wish I would have done this book.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought it was really unique how you took Greek gods and basically said they're actually Fae, which I had never seen done before. I thought that was really unique.
Yeah, and you use the word Fae just as mythical, magical beings, right? I mean, I don't want to get too locked, although I do use the Irish Fae characters in later books. I was just looking for some symbol of all the magical creatures, and that's how they became. You either got Fae or demons, one of the two, right? So that's how that came in.
And I think, you read about the Greek gods, you read about the Greek mythology, and obviously they're using magic, but for whatever reason, like I've never seen them referred to as magical creatures. They've always just been gods. And I really like that you kind of bridge that. Yeah,
that was one of the things that's a theme throughout the book is that they weren't really gods.
Yeah.
They are just magical creatures that have a lot of power. Mm-hmm. And even Gaia, the mother of the earth, there, and I don't want to get into theology, although I do study a lot of theology. Believe it or not, I actually research all these characters, these myths. And I didn't want to get into a thing where someone goes, oh, that's Satanism, that's Christian. But even Gaia admits that there is a higher power or a God, and I do have angels. So I have had a few people in reviews remark that, oh my gosh, there's God. So, I can't read this book, but, mythology is what it is. So, and I do bastardize it still.
And so how many books are in the series?
Right now there's 8. They, pretty much just, it's a progressive timeline, except for the last 2. They're part of a 3-book story arc. He gets transferred to another place that's not this world, it's another world, and it's a totally different Vegas. And it's like a 3-story arc. Gaia's trying to teach him a lesson, so she sends him to this other place. Mm-hmm. And so that'll be finished up probably later this year. Then there's also 2 books. One is written, one is almost done in the heirs of the Vegas Fae series, which right now features his son, Jay, although there may be books with his daughter, Nikki, too.
So you've got 8 books in the main series right now?
One in the other, but one on the way.
Okay, awesome. So that answers the next question. This is an ongoing series.
Yeah, and it's probably won't stop. I was going to actually stop the series after 6. And then, you get a fan base and they're like, oh, no, I had some beta readers. You can't do this. No. So I had to actually change the ending so that it could go on. And then I was trying to figure out what to do. And I go, I'll just make an alternate time, an alternate reality Vegas. Mm-hmm. So just to kind of keep the story going, because it is tough to come up with ideas sometimes, you don't want to repeat yourself too much and you don't want to bore your readers. So you have to keep coming up with, stuff that's fun.
You sort of touched on this already, but you were a cop and you worked for the federal government and then a PI. And all of those roles kind of are incorporated in this series, but it sounds like you've always been interested in fantasy as well.
Yeah, I actually read science fiction, but love fantasy. That's kind of crazy. But the way Return of the High Fae started was, I was actually writing a crime story book, right? And it was not, about me, but it was taking place in Vegas and different crimes. And then I got this lecture about, you got to be careful. And I said, well, screw that. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to cause any grief, right? So then there was an ex-reporter by the name of Al Tobin, who when he and I were working together, he and I worked for the school district. But Al was a Sun reporter and Channel 3 reporter back in the old days. And we were both investigators, and we were both, Al writes too, and he did a lot of stuff online. And this is back in about 2010, 2011, and we're joking around. He says, hey, you should write a story, and we'll use, what do you want to do? Oh, let's use our family as, the basis, but it can't be our family. So So I wrote this short story about Robert Hoskins, this guy, and he finds out there's magic in the world. And Al liked it. So then I found Joe Conrath's Newbie's Guide to Publishing, and I went, oh, Amazon, cool. So I just wrote this book, right? Never thinking it was going to turn into anything. It was just a fun project. It took me a couple years to write, because I didn't do it all the time. Published it. Probably spent about $1,500 in advertising. And in those days, covers were terrible, but a cover took me a year and a half to get that back. It didn't do well at all. I mean, it did okay. I mean, I sold some books. And then crazy, all of a sudden I start getting emails from people. Hey, when are you going to write the next book? So then I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So I wrote the next book and published it in December of 14. And all of a sudden I was making a lot of money. And it was a different world then. A lot of people were looking for books to read, and you didn't have to do the things you have to do today because then the market was much smaller. So the series took off, and I have a nice little fan base that keeps the series going and kicking off, although they're probably pissed at me now because it's been a year since I wrote a book, thanks to COVID and a few other things that happened. But so that's kind of how that started. And so I never really meant to write a series, but it just kind of took off. So I was pretty happy about that. And it was fun. I enjoyed doing it.
So it sounds like it was always going to be set in Vegas. You knew you wanted it.
Yeah, Vegas is just an awesome place. And one of the things I love about Vegas and Nevada is there's a lot of history here, and people go, 1906 Vegas came. What's really, you had gambling, that's it. Well, like and I put this in all my books, every book has some kind of historical fun lesson in it. The first book was, the brothel scene takes place at, and it was a real brothel called the Air and Sea Brothel down outside of Prump. And I named it the Venus, but it was something else. So there's always a real history lesson. Like in one of the books, we talk about 4 Mile. Actually, that was in the first book. We talk about 4 Mile. Well, 4 Mile, where Boulder Station is? Not too far from there. There was a brothel that burned down in the 50s. And the boarding house stood up there for years, up until last year. But there's the 4 Mile bar. And that area was actually a watering place for horses, even back in the 1800s. And the Indians used it before then. So there's a lot of history that people just don't know about. Another book I took ghost stories about areas that in town that had ghost stories, and then integrated those into the book because I just wanted to. And so every single book has some kind of history lesson. Even the alternate timeline mentions comparison between that Vegas and the real Vegas. So I try to throw some old history in there somewhere, and did that with Reno too, in a scene that I had that took place up in the Reno area. So it's a fascinating state, actually.
People get so kind of almost distracted by the strip and the gambling and everything that they kind of don't see all of that really cool, unique history.
And when people think of Vegas, all they think about is the casinos. Well, I don't go to casinos as a general rule, right? I can't tell you the last time I was on the strip when it was last year when it was empty, just to drive it with nobody there. But yeah, as a general rule, I don't want to fight the crowds, right? So, but when my friends come, they automatically assume that's where you go. So, so I wanted to show and center point some of the other places in Nevada and Vegas. So you won't know it's a history lesson because it's just people talking or things that take place. But it makes it fun to me, and I think it's an incredible place.
Again, we kind of already touched on this, but you didn't know you were going to be writing a series when you started this.
No, I did not until it started taking off. And so, and it is a decent source of revenue too. I mean, it used to make a lot more money than it does now. It's a lot harder now. In 2011, man, you didn't need a cover for darn. You didn't have, I made probably the first one I actually had someone do, but after that, I made my own covers for a while. Editors, forget it, man. You just did the best you could because nobody, some people always care. But most people didn't because it was so new. Ebooks were so new, so that the people that got into it just wanted to read, and they'd overlook things that they don't overlook today. Now you see people spending 10% of their profit, minimum to advertise. I know people that spend $20,000 a month at advertise. I'm not going to do that, right? Because it's not worth the risk to me, But then I don't subside totally on my book sales, although they're a nice addition. Even though Uncle Sam gets a big portion of it, but yeah, totally different world now because you could just get away with so much more and a lot harder to get discovered now. Mm-hmm. So now, I don't care if you have the greatest book in the world unless you're really lucky, or if you have connections, it's different. But you have to get discovered. And it's hard, so you almost have to do some kind of advertising. And like a lot of people like me, I didn't realize the value of a mailing list in those days. So I have a small mailing list, but I have acquaintances that have mailing lists of 30, 40,000 people. So, when they put that out, they're going to sell some books, a lot more than me, which is okay. But
even back then, you said you spent some amount of money on
advertising. I spent money on the cover and advertising, and I it did. It took me a year and a half to get the $1,500 back I spent, which was way too much money, by the way, in those days. I made stupid mistakes. You really need to write a series because normally it does take, you'll hear this all the time, it takes 2 or 3, probably 3 books for the series to take off. Like in my case, I wrote the second book, it did okay. And it wasn't until I wrote the third book, which I get the most crap for, that the series really took off and my sales really jumped where I was selling 200-300 books a day for a while.
Wow.
This is back in 15. And I remember seeing that going, holy moly, man, So I was actually on the road to California on a case. And it's like, where did the sales come from? But, and that was another thing, you have to write for you, not for your fans, because I get a lot of crap for that book because I tailored that based on a bunch of questions I got from fans. So it was supposed to be a totally different book, and it turned into what it is, which is a fun little book, but it was more of an explanation of Jay's or Robert's family and how they got involved. And you have to look at expanding your big thing. So it's not just ebooks. You got to have your paperbacks. Now Amazon is starting to offer a hardback, hardbacks. You got to kind of think about the big picture because even though you like paperbacks, you may not sell a lot. There are people that just want to read paperbacks. Mm-hmm. So you have to really think about the big picture. And if you want to make money and if you want to stay, get as many, hit as many potential readers as possible, you have to have all that.
Right. And their different abilities and their different schedules and things. So as the series has gone on, I take it you have started offering more of that stuff as you release new things.
I actually started audio back in 2014 with Return of the High Fae. So it's a great market. It too is getting saturated, so it's getting a lot harder.
Right.
But you really need audio. I mean, I actually make more money in audio than I do in ebook sales. Most of the time, when I put out a new book, then you got that 90-day window. The 30-day window is really great. The 90-day window is okay. And then things kind of fall off. I don't care who you are, unless you spend a ton of money on advertising. Audio stays pretty consistent. I mean, when you put a new book out, it takes a couple of weeks for it to, hit the market. I mean, I think I might sell 2 the first day, maybe 10, but then it spurs sale, because it's new and it's just like, Amazon or the other market when, in the first 30-day window, it gets noticed, people read your other books. If I sell even 100 audiobooks, that's a couple, $300. So now I do a royalty split. So there's 2 ways you can do audiobooks. You can pay someone to do the audiobook, which costs you $1,000 to $4,000 on average, depending on who you get. Unless you get the big guy, it's going to cost you more. Or you can do a royalty split where the narrator and you just split the money.
We've kind of talked about what you were able to sort of get away with in 2011 when you first published. Let's kind of go to the opposite of that. Is there anything that we have now, like a new writer just publishing their first book has now, that you wish you had back then?
Yeah, a lot of it is, you have is a lot more information out there. Like I found Joe Conrad's, Newbie's Guide to Publishing. And now you have a bunch of Facebook groups and different groups that you can go to for advice. 20 Books 50 is a good source. There's things like Six Figure Authors and other Facebook groups, and I'm sure other social medias have groups too. But there's a lot more information available to you, which is a double-edged sword because if you're a writer, the more people that put out books, the more competition you have. And even if they're bad books, they flood the market. So it's a lot harder to get seen, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the point is, if you want to, and this has always been my philosophy, anybody can get a book published now. You don't need, and as a matter of fact, I don't want a publisher. I got offered one time, an attorney friend of mine says, hey, I really like your book. I talked to a publisher friend of mine. They'll publish it and they'll give you X amount of dollars. And I said, gee, I made that last week. That was back in 15 when I was making, 15 and 16. But the point is that you don't have to go that route now. So good example is, I had a school teacher neighbor of my in-laws that she always wanted to write stories about, her time as a teacher. She was in her 70s. So I put that whole book together for her in a couple of days, took all her stuff, it was already edited very well. She was an English teacher. designed her cover, and we popped it up on Amazon all in 2 or 3 days. I mean, she had all the stuff done, but so now, it's easier for a person to publish a book. So if you want to publish a book, you can do it. It would be nice to have had all that information available to you back then. When I first started, you did something in Word, you had to format it exactly the way they wanted to. And then there was like Smashwords, as well as Kindle and draft to digital. And if you didn't format it right, man, the book came out gobbledygook. So now it's a lot easier. Now Kindle has their own publishing tool. You've got Vellum, you've got other things. And I wish you had some of those things in those days. I'm hesitant about spending a lot of money learning things because, there's just so much out there. But if you go to the good sources like, podcasts and blogs like yours, and 20 Books 50 and a few others, they can point you to people that do teach classes that, you're going to get your money's worth. Or, 20 Books 50 has the big conference. All their stuff is online. So you can get a good basic education just by looking, by getting involved in that. So that helped, because a lot of people don't know where, and I had to learn everything the hard way. Now, luckily I was a computer guy, so that helped, but a lot easier now in a lot of ways. Tougher because there's more of it, but you have to kind of weed through the bad stuff to get to the good, but there's just a lot of resources now you didn't have in those days.
Absolutely. And one of them, and I don't know if you had this back then, but one of the things you can do, they have an Amazon advertising integration for KDP. So you just kind of jump on there, just enter a few things.
Itself, a lot easier now. Who did you go? I mean, you had to do research, and Amazon wasn't doing like when I started, they weren't doing advertising for books the same way. So you were doing a lot of other people's email lists, people that not just Tom Keller's email list, but Fussy Librarian, things along those lines that that had dedicated email lists or dedicated Facebook groups to put out book information, and a lot of banner advertising on sites. But it's easy to advertise now. Facebook makes it a lot easier. Amazon advertising, I think, is very important, just because people see your cover, and if they see it enough times, they might go, "Hey, let me check that out." So that's helpful that you didn't have in my day. A new author is going to have to do a little bit, no matter what he does. But I mean, just don't break the bank on it. I've seen people do that. Because everybody thinks this is the greatest book since sliced bread, and the reality is, even if it is the greatest book since sliced bread, you got as much chance to win the lottery of that book continuing like that. So you may make great sales for a short period, but at some point it's going to drop off, unless you're just extremely lucky. And God bless you if you are. So.
Yeah. But you kind of had the opposite journey. You put it out there and it was there for a while, and then it took off several years down the road.
Do you know? I was just lucky. I mean, is that luck? I don't know. I mean, again, the timing was there because I put the book out. I spent a little bit on advertising. I made enough to make my money back. And I was happy because I had published a book. How many people can say that, right? So, and it was a fun book to write. I just never thought it'd be a series. But the craziest thing and the coolest thing was getting emails from people going, "Hey, when are you going to write the next one?" The top authors on Amazon are putting out a lot of books a year. They're not putting them out. I mean, I haven't written a book in over a year. And, you could debate why, but that's irrelevant. But, I'm just not going to make the kind of money there. But if you want to stay relevant, you got to put a book out a month. And you're seeing a lot more collaborations, big authors collaborating together on things. And you also see a lot more publishing companies. They're publishing other people as well as yourself. So a lot of people are, it helps to research your genre, and Amazon, it's a crazy world because your genre doesn't really make sense to what their, genres are, right? So if you're in, in urban fantasy, you could be in mythology too, but there's things in urban fantasy and mythology that don't make sense, that don't necessarily belong there. So the categories are really not airtight. So it's very frustrating at times, So you have to really do the research. So, there are tools now that you didn't have in the old days to do that research. But it's a lot harder to figure out where to be. And it's just a lot tougher because, the big guys, and I say that in the nicest way, the big self-publishers, they're putting out a lot of books, and it's very tough to compete against those.
I follow I believe, urban fantasy writer. I think she's urban fantasy. And I follow her on Amazon, how you can click follow. Right. And it must be every 4 to 6 weeks, I get an email new. And I'm just like, how is that
Well,
even
and there are people
possible?
I get, I don't belong to a lot of email lists now, just because I got to, if you join my email list, the only time I send you an email is if I'm putting something out.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of people tell me that's crazy, because you got to keep people engaged. And I know people that send out 2-3 emails a month, but that drives me crazy. I mean, so yeah, maybe it's better for, maybe it's a better idea in some ways, but I really don't care what an author does with his cat. I mean, on a daily basis, although I do post about my cat, but yeah. So, but I mean, I'm literally seeing, some of these people doing 3-4 emails. I don't know how they have time to do it. Maybe they have someone do it for them. But because of my world, I'm blasted by emails all day. So I don't even have time to read that stuff. So I try to be nice to my email list, which is it's a balancing act. I'm sure, I make maybe be more successful if I got more personal, but I only put an email out when I put something out.
Yeah.
So,
I think when it comes to email, it's mostly about consistency. Like if people, if people trust that like, oh, I know I'm only going to get an email when something new comes out, then they know.
Tell them up front. Tell them up front what they're going to get. Like I know authors that have RVs that we're going to, I'm going to send you emails about my journeys. Okay, great. If I know that up front, and that interests me, that's great. I tell you right up front, I don't send you emails unless I'm putting something out.
To go back to the kind of 2014 rise of your fandom here, do you attribute that solely to just being in the right place at the right time?
Well, I mean, I think it obviously means that the people like the books, right? But I think that was a major factor because the books were able to reach a larger audience at one time than they would be today. Because there was so much less competition, so many less books being put out. So, so I mean, I wouldn't say it's just the time, but you've got to get the books in readers' hands. So the advantage we had back in those days is there weren't, like now, I don't know how many books are being put out a day, thousands upon thousands. Well, that was a monthly basis back then. So, it was getting it didn't really go crazy till 17, 18, 19, but in those days, I mean, people were publishing books, but you could get in the top 100 every time you published a book, So now you don't know if you'll get in the top 100 when you publish a book, in 10 categories, Now the first 80 spots in the top 100 are taken up almost exclusively by big time writers or publishers. Or 47 North people, they're going to get the top because they can advertise all they want to their people, which is great for them. So you only got a few spots on the bottom, where in those days you probably had 50%, if not more, that were available to new authors. So it's just a lot harder to compete now. So, but if you can get a fan base, then they'll kick it off for you. So so the key is building up that fan base.
So that kind of strikes me as an argument to maybe explore new platforms as they come out, new technologies, like jumping on audio or jumping on serials or something like that.
Right. And audio is huge right now, because a lot of people's, I don't know if COVID changed that, but if, not so much here in Nevada because it's a different commute, but my little brother who lives in DC, when he commutes, or goes to New York or goes to somewhere, he takes a train or subway. I mean, he's listening to audio, because that's the easiest thing to do there. So the market is just might have slowed down a little bit with COVID, but I haven't really seen it. So I think audio is a big platform, and it's funny because what goes around comes around. Like now you're seeing Amazon move into, I forget the name, serials.
Vella, yeah.
Their
new thing.
That was really big a few years back. But now Amazon's promoting it. So we'll have to see what happens with that. I know interactive books were tried. I don't know how well they took off, but.
Yeah, if they were around at all, I don't really remember them.
I mean, people want a good story. So if you can come out with a good story, it's just a question of getting it into a few readers' hands that will then help get into a few more readers' hands and propagate from there.
It sounds so easy, and yet it's so difficult.
But the beauty of it is you can get that book out and write it and say, I did this. And someone's going to read it, right? Someone is bound to find it and read it. So even if one person reads it, it's worth it. Yeah. Because it's your story. So that's the beauty of it. So you can't, get too discouraged. I mean, I see that a lot where people go, I put this book out and I've only sold 5 copies in the last 6 months. Well, welcome to the real world. But the point is, you did something most people will never do, and that's write that book.
Mhm.
And all it took was a couple words a day. If you're a writer now, and you want to be a writer, and you've got some manuscripts, you got to get them out of the drawer. I know people that we used to do some classes in town, Tom Harris and I would do some writers groups, and people would say, well, I've got 9 manuscripts and I'm working on it. I'm da 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 da. And they would go to other writers groups and they would be going, 3 pages at a time to read. And I'm like, dude, get the thing out. Well, it's not perfect. Who cares? It'll never be perfect. I mean, the funniest story, another funny story about, I'm at a book thing at the library, selling my books. And this other writer comes up to me and says, hey, I really liked your first book, but you had all this stuff. Can we talk about it? I go, no, I don't care. I've written that book. And now it depends on who you are. I mean, and what your style is, but I wrote that book. I rewrote the book. I had it edited. I know it's not perfect. Maybe my editors wasn't as good as they should have been, but I can't keep going back. You got to look forward. There are really famous writers that they say once they're done with that book, they've forgotten it and move on to the next. And other people agonize over the old stuff, but you got to get it out of the drawer. And at some point, it's like a kid. You got to let them sit behind, go to DMV, get in the car and drive away. Hardest thing in the world, but you got to do that at some point. And that's what a lot of people have a hard time doing. So, I dust off the stuff I wrote in college, and I've got some plans to write a sci-fi series based on a few of those things. Got to be totally rewritten, but still, because the year is different, but.
Yeah, which actually factors nicely into the next question I had, which is, are you planning to write anything outside of the Vegas Fae series at some point?
I am actually. I have an AI series I want to write. It's about a guy that gets in trouble in the military, and because he gets he's kind of becomes the fall guy for something that happened, even though he didn't do anything. And then he hooks up with this ship with an AI, and it's their adventures. And I've got some new civilizations I've created. Some different groups, different types of aliens. So the most important thing is I need to get the J book out, which is the next in the Heirs series. And then it's partially started, but I got to get the 9th book in the Robert, the Return of the High Fae series out, because that's the completion of a 3-story arc. Right. So I got to figure out what to go from there, but I'll figure it out, so that's the fun stuff, I mean, you're living vicariously through your characters. So.
So when you write the series, are you just kind of taking it book to book then?
Yeah, the series now, because like I said, I was going to end it. So because I didn't end it, I had to start going, where am I going to go next? So I decided to do this 3-book arc with this alternate Las Vegas. And then fortunately, when the arc is completed, it gives me the storyline basis to go to the next book. Okay. But I'm really a pantser, I mean, my plotting consists of an outline of where I think the book should go. And then as I write, I let the characters tell me what's going on next. And a lot of people give me a little bit of crap because writing in first person, but I like first person because then the character doesn't know what's coming next. So I kind of enjoy writing in first person, although the sci-fi series is actually third person. But I like where, you might see things, but even then you don't really see what the character doesn't see, right? Because the character, he's got to get information from different places to move on. I have friends that write literally Bibles of plots, 250-word Bible on what the story's going to be. I'm like, man, I could have written a book by then. But I just like writing it. I like the story to carry me away. I get a lot of requests to write a Nikki book, which is his daughter, who's a CSI. And she's also the queen of the Dryads. So there's a lot of places to go with her in the Heirs series. And then Jay, who's a demon hunter. There's a lot of places to go with him. And I'd also like to write some off the track characters that are a little different, just general Fae living in a world, that's, different than their own. So, but I do love writing about Vegas. I like to keep it to Vegas. Part of the fun of the creativity process is standing somewhere where, go, wow, this would be a great place for a story. And for example, I did a big scene up in Utah, Zion National Forest, I think it was. But it's really cool to be there and stand there and go, wow, and you get this idea that comes up. And
I think also, not just as a writer, to be able to walk through the streets, as a reader, it's kind of fun too.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to see things differently, look at things a little bit differently. I went to a Vegas Golden Knights game before COVID, right? And the driver I was supposed to get wasn't there. So my wife and I start walking, and we wind up walking through all these back alleys, right? I mean, like a half a mile of back alleys to get to the strip. And I'm thinking, this is really different. My wife's like, we got to get out of here. And I'm looking at it like totally different. Like, man, this is really cool. There's some really cool stuff you could do here. I mean, in a book, right? Because it was just, a bunch of back alleys, but, different ways into casinos and different things going on. And you're like, wow, this, and people don't look at that way, They just see back alleys that are dark and I better get out of here just in case. But
I was curious, like, if part of the reason your series took off was because of Vegas kind of in the title. I feel like it's a selling point for books.
Yeah, I think people are interested because of Vegas. And the other thing was, I kind of wrote to a niche market of an older fan base. And the nice thing about the Fae is they live forever, or at least almost forever, right? So what is there not to like about a guy that finds out he can live forever, right? Not forever, but because all of us are, what are we afraid of, right? So when we're looking to escape, we want to find. So this is kind of the other thing when I wrote that book was, what do I want to read about? I want total escapism, right? So I want most of my characters to make it. Like when I can kill a character, I can go to Hades and get her out, right? So I did that in a book, and people got really pissed off because oh my gosh, you changed the main character, one of the main characters. Yeah, well, now she gets to grow all over again, right? So that was my way I looked at it. But a lot of people got really upset when I did that. Like I said, I can live vicariously through my characters, but I'm looking for things that, what does Tom Keller want to read about, and what are things that, would make it enjoyable for him? And then hopefully my fan base will find that, will be the same. I mean, people don't like everything you do, but.
It's an interesting way to think about it because you do the advice is to write for yourself, obviously, and it just makes sense. But to kind of turn it and be like, this is what I want to read. Who are the people like me that would read this, and kind of look at your audience that way a little bit, like
and it's you're going to find
of
a smaller audience too, though, when you do that, right? So if you're looking to make a lot of money, you're going to write to market, right? A lot of people write to market. I don't want to do that. I mean, I just enjoy the writing, and if I don't make $1 million, darn it. But I like writing what I like to write. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of different authors out there. I mean, if you're writing a mechanical book on how things work, you're writing to market. I need to describe how this works for people to do it. And if you like that, great. To me, it's just I'm looking for escapism and a book that makes people a feel-good book that's not too many bad things in it, because I don't like bad things. The older I get, the less bad things I want. If you're writing to market to make money, you're going to look at books differently. You need much more of a plan, so, if you want to be, if you're more of, I don't want to say I'm an artist, but if you're more of an artist that wants to write books for the creative content within them, you're going to look at it differently than someone that's, writing to market or writing to a specific market for a specific reason. Like the person that writes your instruction manuals and all your products. But I'm lucky as I don't have to look at this as a job, so it's kind of like, I don't want to sit here and go, okay, every day, although I know, lots of people do that, every day between 6 and 10, I do this. I wish I had that luxury, but I got 4 grandkids, and other things that have going on. So, but I try to write a little bit every day. And except for the last year, I would normally have, do that every single day. I mean, to a new writer, don't be afraid to get that book out there. And the hardest thing, people go, how do you write a book? And I told this to somebody who now has 25 books out, right? More than me. You write one word at a time. So even if you just sit there every day and write a sentence, 5 words, look at the book, write a sentence. And you can always change that sentence tomorrow, but do something on the book. Don't let it just sit there and go, oh, I wrote halfway. I wrote this idea and then it's been on my computer for 10 years. I keep moving it to the next computer, right? Just get out there and do it. And if you really want to do it, you can do it. And even if you don't have a lot of time, write a book in a year, 90, let's say 60,000 words even, that's not a lot of words in a month, right? It's 5,000 words a month. So, break that down to 30, it's not a lot of words, so, or 30 days, if you really want to get a book done. So
we kind of covered what's coming next for you. You've got your plans for the next book in the Vegas Fae Series and a sci-fi book.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that, or is that enough for you?
Fae Revelations should be out in May. I've been saying that for a year, but it's actually almost done, and I just got to get it. I got to do a little family trip, and then I'll get it edited and out. So that'll be the next book, and then I'll work on Robert's book. And I figured I would finish the 3 book arc before I get into the science fiction book. So,
Makes
but
sense.
those are my next, those are the things I'm looking for the rest of the year. So probably get 2 books out this year.
So if people want to sign up for your newsletter or keep up with news about new stuff, how can they do that?
I do have tomsbooks.com. So, sorry for my cuckoo clock. That's, but that right now that points to my Facebook author page, but there's information there how to get to my mailing list. And I also have a Vegas Fae fans Facebook page that, just haven't talked about much lately, but generally we just talk about general stuff and have fun with the series and get ideas. And I give away a lot of audiobooks, I like to try to give away stuff when I can, which is very important if you're a new person. Get that, get your websites built. Whether it's, I don't know if I would do strictly Facebook like I do right now. I used to have websites. I just don't have time to keep them up. But get a web presence, start talking to people, even if there's only 5 of them, and interact with them and get things going, because they're the ones that are going to kickstart your books when they buy them.
And then the final question, if you were to encounter a writer who has either just moved to Las Vegas or is thinking about maybe moving to Las Vegas, what would you tell them in terms of guidance or advice?
It's a great place to live if you're a writer, because there's storylines here everywhere you drive, man. There's something crazy going on, so that that'll spark an interest in you. But it's a good place because there is a good writer community here. And like prior to COVID, we used to meet every week and with a different group, So there's people here that you can bounce ideas off, people here to get you motivated, because motivation is always hard. So I think it's a great place to live and a great place to be if you're a writer. So, plus it's the hub of everything. So you can get anywhere from here, right? It's it's a few hundred miles from anywhere, but you can hop on a plane and go somewhere else pretty easy. So
thank you, Tom, for joining us today. And thanks everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube account. Go follow Tom on Facebook, and we will see you next time.